So the next speaker is Mettle Jones. She's lead architect of SinguClarity AI, symbolic system theorist and an architect focused on behavioral forensics, symbolic modeling, and phase state dynamics. And the presentation is some symbolic AI for ice environments, psycho-ecological resilience tools for lunar habit health and governance. Please, Mettle, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So let me see if I can share my screen here. So SinguClarity, we are working on making symbolically grounded AI tools for therapy, essentially, in ice environments. Now I'll get into some of the particular challenges that ice environments present, but generally speaking, LLMs the way they are now, they don't have the ability to track someone's progress over time and also track drift and accumulative stress. And cumulative stress is one of the major problems that you're going to have in any kind of isolated environment. All right, let me see if I can share my screen here.
Yes, it's coming.
All right. So, if anybody's heard of the Arctic stare, it's hard for people to think about how to model psychological issues because it's not math, it's not engineering, but it should be. Emotion is infrastructure, and just like we need infrastructure for waste treatment, we need infrastructure for emotional waste treatment. So we are finding ways to model behavior based on similar systems analogs. So when you look at something like cumulative stress, you could think of that as metabolic waste saturation. So you see this little unhappy single cell here, or you could imagine like a fish in a tank with too much waste. It's going to have a sluggish metabolic effect, and it's also going to have a toxic accumulation effect. Stress operates much the same way, especially when you add something like sleep disturbance, which stress also causes sleep disturbance. So it's a lot of feedback loops that can compound these issues. So what I've been doing for each of these issues is I try to find the highest confidence systems analog. So in this case, the Arctic stare, or the winter over syndrome, the long winter syndrome, the highest confidence analog happened to be metabolic. But this gives us a way to actually model it. And you might have analogs that are from mechanical systems, something like, venting stress, and it actually does act like pressure valves or something like that. So I take the highest confidence analogs from thermodynamics, electrodynamics, mechanical systems, just whatever fits that thing best. And then we try to apply equations from those engineering and systems dynamics grounded examples. So this is how we are modeling the issues. And I'll give you another example here. This, if you heard about the Bellingshausen stabbing, That was, in 2018, it was two guys cooped up for a really long time, and one guy just snapped over some just slight insults that and the systems analog that had the highest confidence for this kind of emotional issue is surge. So you have an arc flash, you have, voltage surge. There's no longer any room for capacitance to be held. You have an arc. So that's how the modeling came out with this. And then you have faction solidification. So faction solidification would be a failure mode in emotional regulation, similar to crystallization. So this one, its highest confidence analog related to phase state changes. So if you think of sociality as having a kind of fluidity to it, you'd say the flow of conversation. Like we express these things this way for a reason. So if you can imagine the flow of conversation crystallizing, and that stops communication between individuals, between groups. And the classic example of this one was the Biosphere 2 first mission in 1991 and 92. They split into two hostile factions, and even though they still had to do work together, they would not speak as much as possible. So obviously, when you have a station that has to run in a certain way, there has to be flow. And if you model that like a phase state, then suddenly emotional infrastructure is just as important and just as modelable as workflow. And this one's a little bit harder to depict visually, but pressure time inflection. The social failure mode of this is what we call third quarter volatility. So it's happened where, you have Antarctic or submarine crews, and it's called the third quarter phenomenon, where on the last leg of the mission, when people know they're about to go home and it's close to coming to an end, suddenly all the little cracks that were there before really just start to amplify. And people experience irritability, anxiety, and accidents become a lot more common. So this kind of emotional infrastructure makes you more prone to accidents. So that's pretty physical and crucial for the success of any mission. And the system's analog of pressure time inflection. Micro defects propagate rapidly at a certain point. So you just hit that sort of point of increase where it reaches chaos. And this emotional failure mode is called narrative drift. So this might be the one that is a little harder to picture in terms that aren't metaphorical. But that's the challenge of what me and my team does, is trying to take things that seem like they're just metaphorical, like the flow of conversation seems metaphorical, but what if there's actually a way to model it? Narrative drift, if you look at the High Seas mission number 6 in 2018, it was an 8-month Mars simulation, which dissolved after only 4 days. They had a medical incident, and essentially, it seems like they lost sight of the mission and purpose very quickly. Now, there wasn't much information given about exactly what went wrong, but narrative drift is when you lose sight of why you're there. Because, like it or not, people do need to have some sense of purpose. Needing to have a feeling of purpose, needing to understand the meaning, the greater meaning or the personal meaning of what you're doing is a part of human emotional infrastructure. There's a reason that we all seek that. And when you have isolation, a lot of people get meaning from their families. A lot of people get meaning from their communities. And if you're on a research base with just a few other people, you don't have a lot of those same resources. And in that case, most people just have their personal mission of research to keep them going. So, I dream one day of people being able to colonize the moon or colonize Mars. That can keep you going to a certain extent, but when you're there day after day, month after month, everything looks the same, nothing really changes. It gets really easy to lose sight of any sort of meaning or mission or why you're there. So, the Anatta engine, which is the name of our therapy system, is intended to correct these failure modes or prevent these failures. So for narrative drift, for instance, you can have briefings where you talk to each other and find out, well, what's important to you about being here? And you can do this with just people. Our system is AI because, you're not always guaranteed amongst a group of engineers to have someone who's, the humorous one, the fun one, the life of the party that kind of keeps everybody's morale up. So ideally you could have someone perform those functions, or people could, be able to get together in person on the station and foster some sense of community and find some shared meaning that they can all remind each other of. But that takes time too. So if you have an AI system that you can communicate, each researcher communicates with through their own personal device, it can gain a very deep understanding of each person and what's important to them. And when you don't have time to communicate with everybody, it also knows everybody else on the base. So it can say something like, oh, well, it turns out you have this in common with, maybe you should go talk to this person about that. Maybe you could, and that way it at least expedites socialization when you don't really have much time to actually socialize and form community. So in the free energy analog for narrative drift, it's a thermodynamics analog. And by injecting meaning, it's like you're increasing the free energy of the system to prevent collapse. And for faction solidification, cohesion and transparency restores flow of communication. So again, the AI system can operate as a mediator. If somebody is, logging in their daily journal that they feel stressed about this or that, our symbolically grounded, non-stochastic AI system be able to actually track people's emotional states. And since it models stress as an actual systems variable, it can track stress in someone's speech or direct expressions of stress. And as you can see from the metabolic waste example, once someone's stress level gets to a certain point, you can say, oh, this person is reaching waste saturation. They need a way to release stress. Because if you're, especially a researcher or an engineer, you're more likely to just try to push through and ignore stress and keep working. So if you have a third-party system that says, hey, man, slow down a little bit, I think you need to kind of vent and release some of this, or it seems like there's a miscommunication between you and this other person, it knows how to mediate, and it also knows how to tell you when to slow down. And for the voltage surge, for the arc flash archetype, the infrastructure, the emotional infrastructure that could help prevent that would be capacitive micro debriefs and sleep hygiene. So sleep serves a lot of functions, but one of its very important functions is clearing out waste and helping you resolve uncertainty. It's probably the best way to say it. You could say stress, but when you're sleep deprived, it is hard to synthesize information. We do a lot of our information synthesis while we're sleeping. So, you go to bed and all the things that happen throughout the day, they're all kind of swimming around and maybe it doesn't all make sense, but then you sleep on it. And when you wake up, things make a little bit more sense. Things are a little bit more clear. Something that somebody said yesterday is kind of like, oh, well, in the grand scheme of things, that was just words that somebody said and it probably didn't mean anything. But when you are sleep deprived, you start to lack the infrastructure to do that, because when you can't synthesize information through sleep, people get more paranoid. People wake up and they still are feeling like irritated from the things that happened the day before. And I don't know what that meant. What did he mean by that? So sleep deprivation definitely exacerbates that. So really guarding someone's sleep. And if somebody is experiencing insomnia, you can't just move past it. Something has to be done. And the system can track and recognize that. And the capacitive micro debriefs, just releasing a little bit of that extra energy. Could be through exercise. It could be through just venting to your diary. And, with AI now, we can have a conversation with our diary. It doesn't have to be just a one-sided, journal entry. So that feedback helps release some of that capacitance. For third quarter volatility, the infrastructure that you could add emotionally is milestone re-indexing and mid-mission celebrations. So celebrating, acknowledging things that have gone well is good. It makes you feel less like, okay, I just want to get out of here, and more like, oh, okay, well, good things are still happening here. So you're sort of repairing those little micro fissures as you go by doing that, by acknowledging progress. And it's, in systems terms, it smooths the pressure time curve, preventing creep rupture. And that about wraps up that's just some examples of the things that are the system failures that are common to the emotional infrastructure in ice environments, isolated, contained, and extreme. So we would definitely have to worry about that in any lunar context as well. And it would probably be even more extreme because it's guaranteed to be longer term. Now, anchoring behavior with systems analogs in this way, it enables us to model behavioral shifts as a symbolically grounded topological map. So that bypasses the probabilistic and black box issues of LLMs, right? So that allows for stable memory, because even if an LLM is customized so that it remembers your conversation, it's not actually mapping it out and modeling it in quite the same sort of meaningful way. So we use a DAG architecture for the Anata engine, and our team is working currently on building our own LLM, symbolically grounded, non-stochastic LLM architecture. And at the moment, we're just doing it on Llama, starting to get that, in the meantime, until we can actually build the symbolically grounded version. So that's about where our team's at, and that should give you a gist of, what we're trying to do, of just changing the way we think about emotions as a part of the human system, and therefore just as deserving of infrastructure as any other aspect of any other system. So if anybody has any questions or anything.
Yeah, I do. Hi, Maddie. I thought your presentation was really lovely, and it was very useful. I think that things have come a long way, and it sounds like partly because of the work your team's doing. For those who are interested in an application of what Maddie has been talking about, we have an application of the ICE results to the small mining crew on the moon. And this is going to be some of the first people who really show up, because commerce is going to take them there first, I think. And we reacted to a particular design of a mining site that Professor Tenorio developed with his people. And he comes right after me on the third day. So thank you very much for a really lovely summary of the ICE results. It's very, very important in a lot of different circumstances. Again, we're just applying it to one small circumstances, which is your really early mining crew, and they're going to rotate, and that has an effect on some of the ICE factors too. And they know they're going to rotate pretty quick. So, yeah, but staying over in Antarctica is just got to be gruesome. It's so very, very lovely summary, Maddie. Bravo.
No, thank you. Yeah, and really pretty much everyone could use some therapy and some, this is essentially just an extension of biofeedback, right? So anyone could use it, but it's especially critical for ICE environments and, people doing hard labor, and, the corporate aspects, that comes with its own challenges too.
I think that the design that Tenorio has with his people does include wiring people up and keeping pretty good contact on their physiological symptoms.
Several more questions now. So sorry, but Peter Schubert was
no more time. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Nicholas. Mettle, this relationship of the emotional infrastructure to engineering is really instructive. It really helps me understand things in a way I hadn't before. But I don't think I heard you talk about sex. Could you address that? I'm sure you guys talk about that, on Friday nights at work, but how does sex figure into this equation of long duration and ice?
Well, partially, you could in the beginning select for people who are less externalized. So when you look at psychology, you have external locus of control and internal locus of control. A lot of people who do research tend to be very internal, tend to be, especially if they're doing, ice environments, they tend to be very stoic and not express as much. People who are more external are more likely to want to have sex with other people. So in that case, a lot of the externalization gets selected against when choosing people to include in a mission. But of course, if we're doing colonization, you can only select for that so much. Now, if you're doing colonization and there's not as much emphasis on being in a research base, then you can have more community engagement, and then that can involve more sexuality, engagement with other people. In a research context, it becomes just another aspect of regulation. You regulate stress, you regulate adrenaline, you regulate really any hormonal change, even if it's positive. You have a kind of cycle to it. So there is self-regulation in that, but I would say that even with sexual self-regulation, you still risk buildup usually is coming out in other ways. So if someone is kind of pent up in that way, it might come out as hostility, it might come out as overeating. So you kind of then look for other areas that pressure is venting out toward, and try to say, hey, maybe you should take more time by yourself, because sexual regulation isn't purely physical. It's also about having time to be calm and be grounded. It's more than just a physical release. It's also giving yourself permission to take a little bit of time for yourself, get centered, get grounded, and regulate in whatever ways that you need to do. But you have to have space and time.
Shall we try to have a short question by Frida Taube?
Thank you.
I believe that on Biosphere 2 they had individual journals, and my question is, if you know that AI is monitoring you and monitoring other people and possibly putting you in touch with other people, will people be as honest in what they put in that are artificial intelligence journal as they would their own personal journal that no one else is intended to see?
You can have both. You can have your own privacy settings set. And even when you are journaling things that it's not that people can directly see what you're saying, it might come across as suggestions. So if you have something in common, it might say, oh, this information is permitted because this person just openly talks about their interest in the setting with less privacy settings. So it's something that they want people to know. And it won't just go around and tell everyone, but if someone else pings, oh, I'm interested in this as well, then it can connect those people on that point. Or sometimes mediation is necessary, and sometimes it's necessary for survival. So there are ways that you can set privacy, but there's also ways that it can respect your dignity. Think of like a family therapist. They can't tell you what has been said in private, but they can try to help translate. So then it becomes an issue of translation and having some privacy that you can manage yourself.
Thank you, Mettle. That's probably a good place to stop because